At 96 years old, Elena Crowfoot no longer counted her days by calendars or seasons, but by the slow, aching rhythm of her breath and the soft bell tied around the neck of her last cow. Maribel, whose gentle chime drifted across the empty, Wyoming plains like a heartbeat refusing to stop. The world had already buried Elena in its mind long ago. Too old, too fragile, too forgotten, but she still woke before dawn every morning, wrapping her thin shawl around shoulders that had carried grief, hunger, childbirth and burial, and stepped outside her collapsing wooden cabin to greet the frost, like an old enemy she had beaten too many times to fear anymore. Maribel was not just a cow. She was the final thread tying Elena to life itself, the last living promise she had made to her late husband Samuel on the night he died. Coughing blood into her hands and whispering, "Don't let them take our land, and don't let the herd disappear." The herd was gone now, sold, stolen or dead. But Maribel remained, producing just enough milk for Elena to survive, just enough reason to keep breathing. That morning, the wind carried something wrong with it, something sharp and feral, and as Elena's clouded eyes scanned the distant hills, her heart tightened with a feeling older than fear. Predators were near. Coyotes had always roamed these lands, but never like this, not in the numbers the ranchers whispered about in town. Before they stopped coming at all, one became 10, 10 became 100, and soon the nights howled with a sound that felt less like animals and more like hunger-given voice. Elena had heard them last night, their cries overlapping, echoing, multiplying, as if the land itself was screaming. She had stayed awake beside her rusted shotgun, knowing she could barely lift it anymore, knowing it might as well have been a stick of iron, but refusing to sleep because sleep meant surrender. When the sun rose weak and pale, Elena saw the tracks, thousands of clawed imprints circling the grazing field, pressing into the frozen dirt like a warning carved by death itself. Her legs trembled, but she did not fall. She never had. She moved toward Maribel, whispering prayers learned from her grandmother, hands shaking as she tightened the rope around the cow's neck and pulled her closer to the cabin. That was when the first howl came, close, confident, answered instantly by another and another, until the hills seemed alive, crawling with yellow eyes and teeth sharpened by desperation. Elena knew in that moment that if she ran, she would lose everything. If she hid, Maribel would die. And if Maribel died, Elena would follow. So she stood there, 96 years old, bones brittle, lungs burning, staring down a force no human should ever face alone. Somewhere deep inside her, something ancient awakened, not strength of muscle, but strength of refusal. She remembered crossing blizzards barefoot as a child, remembered burying 2 sons before they turned 20, remembered outliving everyone who had ever told her she was finished. "Not today," she whispered, gripping the wooden staff Samuel had carved for her 50 years ago. As the first line of coyotes emerged from the grass, then another, stretching farther than her failing eyes could see. Elena planted her feet into the frozen earth like roots of an old tree that refused to fall. The wind howled, the coyotes answered, and somewhere in the chaos of fear and courage colliding, a 96-year-old woman prepared to fight 1,000 predators, not because she believed she would win, but because surrender was something she had never learned. And if this story is already tightening your chest and pulling you into Elena's world, remember to subscribe to the channel, because what happens next will prove that courage does not belong to the young. It belongs to those who refuse to quit. The moment Elena stepped forward, the world seemed to pause, as if even the wind held its breath to witness something it had not seen in generations. A 96-year-old woman standing alone between her last cow and a sea of death, her shadow long and thin against the pale morning light, while 1,000 coyotes circled like a living storm, their bodies low, muscles coiled, eyes burning with the cold intelligence of hunger sharpened by numbers. Elena could feel her heart pounding, not with panic, but with a strange clarity, every beat reminding her she was still alive, still capable of choosing how this day would end. She raised Samuel's old staff and struck it against the frozen ground, the dull crack echoing across the plains. And then she screamed, not a scream of fear, but a raw, broken sound pulled from the deepest well of grief and defiance inside her. The same sound she had made decades ago, when she stood at the edge of two small graves and refused to let the earth swallow her spirit. The coyotes hesitated, confused by a prey that did not flee, by a voice that carried command instead of weakness. And in that hesitation Elena acted, dragging Maribel closer, positioning her own frail body as a shield, whispering into the cow's ear as if calm itself could be transferred through breath and touch. The first coyote lunged, teeth flashing, and Elena swung the staff with everything she had left, the wood cracking against bone, sending the animal yelping back into the mass. And in that instant, something impossible happened. The pack faltered, not retreating, not advancing, but wavering, because predators understand resolve even better than fear. Elena moved again and again, not fast, not strong, but relentless. Each step forward a declaration that this land, this cow, this life would not be taken quietly. Her lungs burned, her vision blurred, and blood trickled from her palms, where the staff had splintered. Yet she kept moving, kept shouting words that mixed prayer and warning, calling upon ancestors long buried, beneath the same soil that now shook. With snarling paws, the coyotes regrouped, spreading wider, trying to overwhelm her from all sides. And Elena knew the truth then. She could not win by force, only by breaking something deeper than hunger. She reached into the pocket of her coat and pulled out the small rusted bell she had kept since childhood. The same bell her mother had once used to scare wolves during a winter famine. And with trembling hands she rang it again and again, the sharp metallic sound cutting through the howls like a blade. Unfamiliar, piercing, wrong. The coyotes recoiled, their formation collapsing into chaos as the bell rang louder, Elena's voice rising with it, her body swaying but refusing to fall, until at last the pack began to retreat, first a few, then dozens, then hundreds, pulling back toward the hills, as if some ancient rule had been invoked, leaving behind silence so sudden it felt unreal. Elena stood there long after the last howl faded, leaning against Maribel's warm side, tears freezing on her cheeks, not from fear but from release, because she understood. She had not just saved a cow. She had reminded the land that courage still lived upon it. When neighbors finally arrived hours later, drawn by rumors of noise and movement, they found an old woman seated calmly on a broken fence post, feeding her cow by hand as if nothing extraordinary had happened at all. And when they asked her how she survived, Elena simply said, "I didn't fight them. I refused them." That story would spread far beyond the plains, whispered in towns, shared across screens, reminding millions that strength does not expire with age, and that even when the world gathers against you like 1,000 hungry shadows, one unyielding heart can still make them turn away. And if this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you never to surrender what you love, make sure to subscribe to the channel, because stories like Elena's exist to prove that true power is not in numbers, youth, or weapons, but in the will to stand when everything tells you to fall.